Hello, my name is Doris, and I'm 35 years old. 6 years ago, I married my husband, Mason, who is 3 years older than me. My life took a drastic turn when my beloved father passed away after battling an illness, leaving behind a significant inheritance. I chose to invest this inheritance in a new house that I treasure deeply. The comforting scent of fresh wood fills the space, and I often find myself imagining how proud my father would be to see it. Before he passed, my father lived alone in our old family home, just a 10-minute walk from our apartment. After my mother died, I moved out a few years later, and shortly after that, my father suffered a fall and didn't recover. With the inheritance, I made the tough decision to demolish our old house and build a new one in its place. I believe that although the physical structure of the old house is gone, the joyful memories we created there will always remain in our hearts. Mason often quoted my father about the importance of building a new home as a symbol of a fresh start. At first, I thought he was simply trying to comfort me, but soon I realized that his intentions were not so innocent. One evening, Mason abruptly asked me to complete and submit divorce papers. Confused, I pressed him for clarification, and he bluntly stated that we were getting a divorce and that the new house, built with my father's inheritance, was meant for his mistress with whom he planned to live. I was stunned by this revelation. Mason confessed to having an affair for about 9 months, describing his mistress as charming and kind, someone who genuinely loved him, a stark contrast to how he portrayed our relationship. He claimed that coming home to me was always unpleasant and declared his intention to take the house as alimony, insisting that our childless 6-year marriage had no further benefits for him. In my distress, I sought comfort from Mason, but he only blamed me for his actions, asserting that my demeanor had pushed him into the arms of another. In a final act of cruelty, he handed me an envelope containing $12,000, calling it my alimony, and told me to be grateful as he planned to take the new house for himself. Overwhelmed by his betrayal but maintaining my composure, I returned the envelope, refusing the money. The house, once envisioned as a sanctuary filled with memories and love, had become the backdrop for a heart-wrenching revelation. I agreed to the divorce, stating firmly, "If you don't love me anymore, there's no point in us staying married. I don't need the money." Mason looked surprised by how readily I accepted the end of our marriage. With a nod, he warned, "Well, if you say so, just don't ask for it back later." Within a few days, he had packed his belongings and left, taking the keys to our newly built house with him. However, shortly after moving out, Mason frantically called me, his voice tense with panic. "What did you do?" "The police showed up at the house talking about warrants and charges of trespassing." "What's going on?" According to him, the police had barged in while he was with his mistress, demanding to know if they understood the legality of their actions. "We're here because you entered this house with a stolen key, which constitutes both theft and trespassing. Do you understand that?" the officers explained. Mason, shocked and confused, turned to his mistress, who looked equally bewildered. "Isn't this your house? You said you wanted to show me," she murmured. "Be quiet and stay out of this," he snapped, just as one of the officers interjected. "Sorry to disrupt, but we need to handle this at the station." Caught between the police and his mistress, Mason called me in desperation. "Why is this happening all of a sudden? What did you do?" "I haven't done much," I replied calmly. "I simply reported that my house keys were stolen and that strangers were in my home. It's only natural to call the police." I had already filed the divorce papers and reverted to my maiden name Doris before reporting the situation. "This is my house," I continued, staying firm. "Didn't you agree to give it to us as alimony?" he argued. "I never agreed to that," I countered. "It's convenient for you to twist things to fit your narrative. Are you joking? How can you think that house is yours? I'm the one on the house contract. I paid for it with my inheritance from my father. I own the land too." "But your father said it was for us," Mason protested weakly. "That was when you were my husband. Now we're divorced and practically strangers. Why would you think it's your land?" I replied sharply. My father had wisely transferred the land rights to me when he felt ill to prevent any complications if something happened to him. Perhaps he foresaw something like this, which might explain why he advised demolishing the old house and building a new one. It was becoming increasingly clear to me that money and property could easily become sources of contention. When I agreed to the divorce, Mason's usually calm demeanor suddenly made sense to me. "So you planned this all along?" I realized. He defensively replied, "I did nothing wrong." You've misunderstood everything from the start. It was almost comical to see him so clueless, thinking he would be happy with his mistress. Stop being ridiculous, I retorted. You blame me for the affair, the divorce, and losing the house. How does it feel now, caught between your girlfriend and the police? Mason could only groan in response, clearly uncomfortable with how things were unfolding. Hating me is misguided, I continued. This mess is entirely your doing. Ever heard of you reap what you sow? This is what you deserve. At that moment, his anger erupted, and he began shouting accusations over the phone. Suddenly, his voice was interrupted. Excuse me, are you Mr. Gold's ex-wife? He's causing a disturbance at your house. Could we have a word, please? A police officer had taken over the call. I took a moment to explain the situation to the officer, who sympathized with my predicament. Later, Mason and his mistress were taken to the police station. Mason insisted that the house was a gift from me and claimed it wasn't a case of trespassing. His mistress, genuinely surprised, stated she had no idea they were trespassing. Mason tried to support his claims with so-called evidence at the station, but ultimately, the mistress's statement was deemed credible, and she was released with just a warning. Mason, however, was found guilty of theft and trespassing and received a fine. The issue then arose that Mason had named me as his guarantor upon his release, likely because he didn't want his strict parents to find out. The officer, clearly exasperated, relayed this information to me. Why should I be his guarantor? We're divorced and practically strangers now, I replied firmly. I have no connection with Mr. Gold anymore, so I refuse. He has parents nearby. Please contact them. The officer informed Mason, who looked visibly frustrated. His parents, already aware of our divorce due to his infidelity, had not yet been informed of his attempt to take the new house. The police call had brought them fully up to speed on the situation. Reluctantly, after his parents requested more details, I agreed to visit Mason's parents' house. When I knocked on the door and began to explain the situation, Mason's mother immediately cut me off. No need to apologize, she said. It's all my foolish son's fault. Did you know about this? I asked, still in disbelief. Well, my son is here with his mistress, she revealed, gesturing to the much younger woman by her side. We were led into the living room to discuss the situation, and to my astonishment, Mason had brought his mistress along, creating an incredibly tense atmosphere. The living room scene unfolded with Mason, the young woman, and my stern-looking father-in-law, Russell. Russell, it's been a while. I'm sorry for the delay, I greeted them. Doris, thanks for coming, Russell responded. I apologize for calling you after the divorce, but I've heard Mason's side of the story. However, I can't fully trust someone who's been arrested for trespassing. Can you tell me your side? I recounted everything as requested. Throughout my explanation, Mason and his mistress kept their heads bowed, avoiding eye contact. What were you thinking, trying to take Doris's new house? Are you insane? Russell demanded of Mason. It's not that simple, Mason interjected, attempting to defend himself. How is it even possible? Russell retorted, clearly frustrated. Your story is completely different from hers. Apparently, Mason had spun his own version of events before I arrived. What were you told? I asked. Russell explained. He claimed you willingly transferred the house to him, then changed your story and reported him, leading to his wrongful arrest. Really? He said that. I was incredulous. It's true that when we discussed the house, I didn't object, but that doesn't mean I agreed to transfer ownership. To suddenly claim the house as yours and report it is beyond comprehension. I'm so sorry, Doris, for having such a son, Mason's mother apologized. What are you saying, Mom? Mason exclaimed. I'm telling the truth. Doris wasn't agreeing, his mother replied. She was too stunned to speak, Mason argued, incredulous. How could you misunderstand and still claim to be her husband? I nodded in agreement with Russell despite everything. Mason continued to make excuses. Anyway, you never mentioned owning the land. If I'd known, I wouldn't have done this, he said defensively. If I had told you, you'd have found another excuse to do the same thing, I replied sharply. How can you say that? He countered, gesturing toward his mistress. Were you spending a lot on her? No. Why would you think that? I shot back, feeling a rush of indignation. Right after our divorce, I had no reason to. I unexpectedly ran into one of Mason's colleagues, and during our conversation about the divorce, I received some shocking information that left me reeling. Mason's colleague looked uncomfortable as we spoke. No offense, but I thought this might happen, the colleague mentioned, and I asked, "What do you mean?" After a moment of hesitation, the colleague finally spilled the details that I should have known sooner. I hadn't been aware of the full extent of Mason's actions until this conversation. He had been openly bragging about his mistress, a woman 15 years his junior, lavishing her with expensive bags and jewelry. He even boasted about his plans, sharing that he intended to divorce me to marry her, capitalizing on her recent inheritance from her deceased father to build a new house. He said, "Once the house is built, I'll divorce Doris and claim it, no matter the opposition. Then my young wife and I will live in that big house," the colleague recounted. It seemed the house built with my father's inheritance wasn't just a home but a grand gesture intended for his proposal to her. Furious, I confronted Mason. "I've heard everything. Do you still insist you did nothing wrong?" My frustration was evident. Mason, visibly flustered, tried to justify his actions. "Well, yes, I bought her gifts. So what? I used my own money and gave Doris her living expenses. She's not my destined partner. This woman is. I brought her here today to announce our marriage." His parents, who were present during this shocking confession, reacted with disbelief. But the most astonishing response came from the mistress herself. "Mary, did I ever say we were even dating?" she declared. "What do you mean?" Mason asked, bewildered. "Exactly that," she replied firmly. "I'm not in a relationship with him. I only approached him for a sugar daddy arrangement. I told you from the start that I was looking for someone for that, and even married men were acceptable. You agreed to it initially, but now what are you talking about? That's creepy." Mason went pale, stunned by her revelation. At that point, I asked her, "So why did you come here with him today?" The mistress explained, "I came to ask for more time to pay the alimony. I knew he was married, so it was clearly an affair, and while I was prepared to pay the alimony, I was still just a student." "How old are you?" Russell, Mason's father, interjected, looking bewildered. "I lost my parents early and have been engaging in sugar dating to pay for college. I sold all the gifts for living expenses," she confessed. This revelation left the room in stunned silence as everyone grappled with the depth of deception and the unexpected turn of events. As the discussion continued, the mistress clarified her financial situation. "I just secured a job and can start paying alimony from my salary," she explained. "So you came here to ask me to wait for the alimony?" I asked. "Yes, that's right," she confirmed. Mason, who had been quietly listening, suddenly erupted in anger. "Didn't you hear her? She never intended to marry or even date you. That's separate from the alimony you owe," I pointed out, trying to redirect the conversation back to the pressing issue. "What about the house you said you wanted?" Mason challenged the mistress. "I meant I'd want a house someday when I marry. It wasn't about marrying you," she replied, clarifying her intentions. Mason exclaimed in disbelief. "I was taken to that house thinking it was yours. Then the police came, and I learned it was your wife's." The mistress bowed deeply to me, acknowledging her respect and recognizing that all this confusion stemmed from Mason's misunderstandings. "All right," I said, seeing an opportunity to resolve at least one issue. "If you promise to pay the alimony properly, I'll wait for the payment, but promise me no more sugar dating. It might not end well next time." "I promise I'll never do it again," she said earnestly, then turned to Mason. "I'll address the financial aspects of our separation. Expect a claim for alimony from me without delay." "Alimony? What are you talking about?" Mason asked, bewildered and clearly not expecting to pay alimony himself. "You said you didn't need alimony when you returned the money," I reminded him. "I gave you $122,000, and now you're asking for more? That's not what we agreed on," Mason protested. "I don't recall any agreement," I replied. "You returned the $122,000 I gave you, saying you didn't need it. What I meant was that I didn't need such a trivial amount for alimony. Do you have any idea how much alimony for infidelity is? It's $30,000, I clarified. And you're also at fault for not having children in the 6 years we were married." Suddenly, Mason accused, changing the subject. At that moment, a loud slap echoed through the room. "What are you doing, Mason?" someone asked as he held his cheek, clearly stunned by the impact. "Are you serious? Do you think her inability to have children is her fault?" I asked, incredulous at his audacity. "Enough with the jokes, Dad," Mason's father interrupted, turning to him. Don't tell me you're blaming Doris for your affair too. Well, that's how it is, Mason said defiantly. I should have never married her. It feels like fraud, Mason lamented. How could you think that? I challenged him. Your parents wanted grandchildren. If she couldn't get pregnant, they thought it was better to split up. That's why I chose her, he replied, defensively. If you truly believe that, Mason's father, Russell, said, visibly disappointed, then we must have raised you wrong. It took your mother 8 years to conceive you. Mason's mother, Deborah, had endured 8 long years of intense fertility treatments before Mason was born. The strain and heartache of watching others easily start families while she struggled were immense. Now, as she listened to the unfolding drama, tears streamed down her cheeks, a silent witness to the pain revived by her son's actions. Russell, deeply disappointed, finally said, "Leave this house now." Mason, clearly bewildered, asked, "Why?" "You're my long-awaited son, but I can't bear to look at you right now," Russell responded, sadness heavy in his voice. "Don't come back until you truly understand your mistakes." "But where should I go?" Mason asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Back to our apartment," I interjected. "That apartment has already been canceled. With the new house, there was no need to keep it," I continued. "I canceled it right after reporting it to the police. You have no place to return to." Mason was visibly shaken, realizing he had nowhere to go. Frustrated, he turned his blame toward his mistress. "It's your fault. All the money is spent, and now you say you never intended to marry me. It's fraud." She remained calm and replied, "I was clear about it being a sugar relationship from the start. I never asked for money or gifts. If you want to sue, go ahead. But I have proof of our arrangement. And don't forget the alimony." Seeing Mason flustered, I chimed in. "Wait, please wait," he stammered, but I ignored his plea. I contacted his parents to inform them of the situation and then left their house. Later, I hired a lawyer and sent a demand letter for the alimony, making sure it wasn't sent to his parents' house since Mason no longer lived there. "Why is it being sent here?" the receptionist at Mason's workplace asked, puzzled as she looked at the letter. "It's possible to send such documents to both residential and employment addresses," I explained. "Is this what this is about?" she inquired, noticing Mason's pale, shaken demeanor. "Yes," I confirmed. "I just told the truth. No one asked me to keep quiet. It's his own doing." The arrival of the demand letter at Mason's workplace quickly spread news of his actions, including his involvement in sugar dating. This revelation sparked a wider discussion among his colleagues, casting a shadow over his professional reputation. After a series of embarrassing losses and being unable to cope with the whispers and rumors, Mason decided to resign from his job, insisting that he was leaving on his own terms. His difficulties didn't stop there. He sought out free legal advice, convinced that he was a victim of marriage fraud. However, the legal advisor was not encouraging. "We've seen cases like yours, but based on the evidence you've provided, this isn't considered fraud," the advisor explained. "You initially agreed to a sugar relationship. If you developed feelings later on, that was on your part alone. You can sue if you wish, but it's likely just a waste of money." Heeding the advice, Mason chose not to file the lawsuit, feeling defeated. Later, he confided in me, regretting his past actions. "I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't realize how significant you were even after 6 years together. I promise I'll make you happy this time and won't let myself be distracted by others," he pleaded earnestly. However, his plea didn't move me. My decision was firm. "I refuse," I replied sharply. "Why, after all this begging?" he persisted. Over those 6 years, I had come to recognize that Mason was not a good person. He blamed everything on me, tried to take what was mine, and then shamelessly returned after losing everything, expecting reconciliation. "What benefit would there be for me to reunite with someone so selfish?" I questioned. Mason protested. "You don't have to put it that way. You once said the same things to me." Nonetheless, I remained resolute. "Never contact me again," I stated firmly, aware of his current predicament. I then hung up, deleted all his contact information, and changed my phone number. A few days later, an unexpected incident occurred. "Your ex-husband came to the house the other day," one of the neighbors informed me. "We had to chase him away after he caused a disturbance." What was he thinking? I wondered aloud, shocked. The neighborhood ladies, familiar with the situation, had even pretended to call the police to scare him off. Since then, I hadn't seen him and was unsure of his whereabouts or his current situation, but I was confident he wasn't leading a happy life.